pack my shoes and out the door. 5, I'm alive. 6, 7, 8, feeling great.
Hello and welcome back to Beyond Your Wildest Dreams podcast. My name is Dr. Noah DeCoyer and I am your co-host. Today we have the pleasure of interviewing Todd White from Dry Farm Wines, and our topic will be biohacking healthy wines and microdosing alcohol. Todd has been a serial entrepreneur and creator since he was age 17. Today, after 15 years in the wine business, his life is dedicated to educating and helping people make better choices about food, nutrition, and how they think about consuming alcohol. He is the founder of Dry Farm Wines, a writer, speaker, and a leading authority on healthy, organic, natural wines and the importance of microdosing alcohol for health, longevity, and vitality. Todd's passion is unlocking the best way to enjoy alcohol, how to enjoy the benefits of moderate consumption while avoiding the negative outcomes. Todd has been featured guest on many of the nation's leading health influencer podcasts, including Dave Asprey's Bulletproof Radio, Mark Sisson's Bulletproof, Primal Blueprint, Abel James's Fat Burning Man, Robb Paleo Solution, and Jimmy Moore's Living Low Carb Show. Dry Farm Wines is the only lab-tested, all-natural, health-quantified wine merchant in the world that biohacks wine, quantifying organic and natural farming practices as well as low-intervention natural winemaking practices. Dry Farm Wines curates all natural, pure, real wines from all over the world, working with small family farms that are committed to producing pure natural wines. Dry Farm Wines is also excited to be the largest reseller of natural wines in the world. Todd, how are you today?
Awesome, and thanks for having me on the show. I'm really excited to share some great knowledge with your listeners today.
Yeah, I'm happy too. Like I told you prior, I just got my Thanksgiving shipment from Dry Farm Wines, and I'm probably start drinking this weekend, I think.
Awesome. Yeah, we have had just an incredible Thanksgiving season as people are preparing for healthy drinking during the holidays.
That's right. So listen, I found this off your website, and I wanted to start here because it's really the foundation. And it says Dry Farm Wines curates only the highest quality natural wines from small organic family farms that meet our strict standards of health. Unlike today's commercialized and processed wines, this is real. Pure, sugar-free, low sulfites, low alcohol, mycotoxin, mold-free, no additives, dry-farmed, biodynamic, old vines, hand-harvested, small production, gluten-free, paleo, keto-friendly, low-carb friendly. What do you have to say about all that?
Wow, that was a mouthful. We are the only health-quantified wine merchant on the planet. And so what we do is we work with small family farms, primarily in Europe. There are no American producers of these wines. I've been ketogenic for 3 years, and as a result, I'm also sugar-free.
Right.
So this is kind of how I ended up going down this journey of, I had been in the wine business for a long time and had been biohacking and following various nutrition and fitness regimens for a couple of decades. I mean, like many people, I kind of started out with low carb at the Atkins program, and then from there, just sort of experimented over the years, and finally ended up pursuing a ketogenic diet nearly 3 years ago, and I come out of ketosis a handful of times a year, but that led me to, I just couldn't drink standard wines anymore. So I, like even most people in the wine business, don't know anything about natural wines and don't really know a whole lot about what goes on in modern winemaking. So what's happening today is that there are 76 additives approved by the FDA for the use in winemaking. 38 of those include the acronym GRAS, which stands for Generally Regarded as Safe. Now, the reason you don't know that there are 76 additives approved, and there's some pretty nasty chemicals in there, including aluminum phosphate, heavy metals, copper, defoaming agents, all kinds of nastiness, that color agents, all kinds of nasty chemicals that you don't know anything about, because the wine industry has kept this dirty, dark secret behind closed doors. And how they've done that is with their friends at the government. So they spent tens of millions of dollars to keep labels off of wine. Therefore, you have no idea what's actually in it. So the consumer knows nothing about what's actually in wine. because the wine industry has kept labeling off wine. Wine is the only major food group without a contents label on it, right? So you just don't know what's in it.
I was looking through some notes and looking through your website again, and learning a little bit more about your product and the wines, and that just totally astounded me. Todd, I grew up in a town where there was a lot of old school Italians, and they would make their own wine. So then my brother and I decided we were going to make our own wine, and I don't drink a lot. I like hard liquors. I like craft beers, but I've been gluten free for a long time, so that kind of knocked that out of the boat. But every time I would drink wine, I just wouldn't feel right, and I always thought it's a little bit too sweet. It's probably the sulfites. But from what you just said, it's not necessarily the sulfites. It's everything else that's added to the wine that's likely causing people all these problems, correct?
Well, here's what we know. Here's what we know is that we don't know a lot, because there's not been nobody to fund any real research around this. But here's our experience, and I can tell you what we find, and we work with lots and lots of other people, and we coach, and we have thousands of customers across the United States who constantly feedback to us. Here's what we know. It's probably not sulfites that are making you feel bad, unless you have a legitimate sulfite allergy, in which case you'd be walking around with an EpiPen in your pocket, because sulfite allergies are quite serious. They're also very rare. And there's sulfites in all kinds of food types, wine just being the least among them. But that being said, we do have a cap on sulfites for which we allow in wine. Now, sulfites are naturally occurring in winemaking, so even if there's no added sulfur dioxide, which becomes sulfites in wine, and sulfur dioxide is used primarily as a preservative and a sterilizer of wine in commercial wines. But we'll get back to that in a moment. But here's what we don't know. We don't know exactly what all is making you feel bad, but here's what we do know. When we remove all of these additives and we get rid of this added sulfite, and we get rid of all of the manipulations and additives and modern technologies that have been added to winemaking to make them sweeter, richer, denser, when we get rid of all that, you drink these natural wines and you feel terrific. So what are we removing that's causing you to feel bad? We're not sure. There's just no research around it. What leading scientists do believe is that biogenetic amines like tyramine and histamine are probably what's making you feel the worst, in addition to the dehydration caused by high alcohol, which is the reason we only sell and we only drink low alcohol wines. So we appreciate the positive aspects of alcohol and what it can bring to a dinner table and to community and the sense of euphoria and heightened creative expression. But with that, I want to keep that dose at a level that is pleasant and lifting and keeps me cognitively connected, and also doesn't wake me up at 3 o'clock in the morning being dehydrated, which is the most common problem for people having sleep issues with drinking. And that's just simply drinking too much alcohol at too high of a dose. And so you wake up at 3 a.m. The problem with waking up at 3 a.m., you can get a drink of water. The problem is you can't go back to sleep, because then the monkey mind and all the other things that are going on in your life kind of crop up, and so you get busy thinking about life instead of sleeping. That's the primary problem with waking up at 3 a.m. If it weren't for that, you could just go back to sleep, right? So it's both an alcohol dose, but it's also all these additives. So when you remove all the additives and you lower the dosage down, you end up with a terrific wine experience.
You say your wines are sugar-free, and most people think of grapes as being extraordinarily sweet, but I'm assuming that all the wines that you curate all the sugars are fermented out totally, correct?
That's correct. So just a couple of just a quick winemaking lesson for your listeners, because everybody doesn't know how wine's made and doesn't understand. It's very simple. Real wine is just fermented grape juice. Now, that's not what commercial wines are. And how you ferment that grape juice is, then this is another important distinction. In natural winemaking, which is a very specific protocol, that's the wines that we drink and sell, are called natural wines. And if you Google that on the internet, you'll see it's an emerging category. A lot of people have an interest in it. It's a very specific category of wines. They're very difficult to find in the United States. We're the largest reseller in the world, and certainly the largest seller in the United States by a large margin. But natural wines, let me just run down the quick list of what defines a natural wine, and then come back in a moment to your question. So natural wines are dry farmed. That means that they are farmed without irrigation. They are all organic or biodynamically farmed, chemically free. Biodynamic farming is a prescriptive organic form of farming. It's just an advanced organic farming. They are fermented, and this is what took me down this path. They are fermented with native yeast. Now, this is very important. This is also another element that we believe may be causing people to feel bad. Commercial wines, which is all wines that are not natural, which is 99.99% of all the wines in the market, are fermented with genetically modified commercial yeast. And there's a reason for that. The reason is that it's easier and less risky for the winemaker to use a commercial yeast than to work with the very fragile native yeast that is indigenous to the vineyard where the grapes were grown. So on the outside of every grape, on the skin of every grape,
right, that's
is
white
yeast.
Film. That's
it's
kind of
already
like the white
present.
film on the grape.
And so, yes. And so that there's yeast there. And so all of our wines are made with that yeast that is on the skin of the grape. Now, let me comment on the fermentation process and how that works. So when you make wine, what you're doing is inoculating the grape juice, which is filled and rich with sugar, inoculating it with the yeast. In the case of natural wines, using the yeast that is present on the skin of the grape. So no added yeast, no commercial, no genetic modified yeast. You're actually using the yeast that's on the skin of the grape. So you crush the grape with the skin, right? And when the yeast inoculates the sugar, the yeast eats up the sugar. And when the yeast is eating the sugar, the byproduct of that is carbon dioxide and ethyl alcohol. Now, if the wine is fully fermented, meaning that the yeast is allowed to eat all of the sugar, then the yeast will die at the end of that fermentation process, and you have a fully fermented sugar-free wine. What's happening in commercial wines is that, as a matter of style, the winemaker is using sulfur dioxide to kill the yeast prior to it completing fermentation, leaving residual sugar behind. Now, the reason they do that is because the American palate, and now a global palate, lends itself to be attracted to things that taste sweet, as we all know. So that's the appeal, and that's why they do it. But for those of us who believe that sugar is public enemy toxin number one in the nutrition system, which I'm sure you do, I do, I'm not interested in sugar. And so I want to drink a sugar-free product. And I don't eat sugar, and I don't even eat commercial salad dressings or in restaurants, or because they all contain sugar. So I'm 100% sugar-free, and I put a lot of effort into that. I certainly don't want to drink it in my wine. So anyway, once the wine is fermented in the natural winemaking process, there are no additives, no new oak programs, no manipulations to the juice at all. It is aged in a neutral vessel, whether that would be neutral oak or clay or concrete or stainless steel, but it's aged in a neutral vessel, so we're not bringing in any excess tannins. Tannins are another thing that we believe are causing many people to feel bad. Excess tannins. All wines have tannin in them or all red wines do. Tannin comes from contact with the skin and the seed or the stem if you use that type of fermentation. And just to let your listeners know quickly, I'm sure you know this, but some people don't know, red wine derives its color from contact with the skin. So In other words, if you squeeze the juice from a white grape and you squeeze the juice from a red grape, they're both clear. The way red wine gets its color and tannins and body and other structure and extra polyphenols and resveratrol and all of there are almost 1,000 polyphenols like resveratrol in red wine. But all of that comes from contact with the skin and the seeds. And so what happens is you press the juice off, which is clear, and then you put the skins and the seeds and sometimes the stem, depending upon your winemaking style. You put that into the tank, and that contact with the clear juice and the skins is how red wine gets its color. And generally why red wine is thought to be healthier than white wines because of some 1,000 polyphenols that are present in red wine.
Non-irrigated. Does that mean that these grapevines, they're just watered by whenever it rains? Is that what that means?
It does. It's exactly what it means, but it's a way bigger story than that. So it's when a vine. First of all, grapevines have been living for some 10,000 years without irrigation. It's illegal to irrigate in almost all of Europe. It's against the law. The reason being is Europeans who've been making wine for 3,000 to 4,000 years know what I know. When you put water on a grapevine, you fundamentally change the physiology of how that vine develops, and most importantly, how it ripens its fruit. Talk about that for just a moment, but you all 99.999% of American vineyards are irrigated. Now, keep in mind, irrigation didn't come to the United States for grape farming, for grapevines, until 1973. Up until then, grapevines were not irrigated. Now, the reason you irrigate a grapevine is because it's more profitable. So, like most of agribusiness in the United States and now across the globe, the effort and focus is not on making a better product or a healthier product. The focus is on making it faster and cheaper. So common sense will tell you when you fill a grapefruit, when you fill grape berries with water, they weigh more. And when you feed them nitrogen and give them excess water, they grow bigger yields. Well, grapes are sold by the ton. So if they're filled with water with bigger yields, they're more profitable. That certainly does not make them better. In fact, what happens is, and common sense will tell you all of this, when you fill a grape berry with water, the problem with that is that now we have to pick that berry later, right, when the sugar levels are higher, in order to achieve proper flavor development that makes them ready to pick. Now, an unirrigated grape berry has less water in it and a more concentrated flavor and can and is picked at a lower sugar level. Now, the reason that's important is for two reasons. One, the level of sugar in the fruit at the time of picking ultimately determines the amount of alcohol that will result in the end product. The higher the sugar, the more sugar for the yeast to eat. Consequently, the more alcohol is created. This is why you see commercial wines now at 14.5 to 16.5 or 17.5% alcohol, right? There are two reasons. They're picking at higher sugar levels, and also as a winemaking style, Americans just want bigger, bolder, richer. Right? Well, for your audience and for the way we eat and drink, we're not looking for bigger, bolder, richer. We're looking for leaner, cleaner. Right? And so that's where we fill this amazing void for two reasons. Because, first of all, thanks to people like you, we're able to educate your audience about things that they had no clue about. They thought they were drinking red wine, and their doctor told them, if you're going to drink, you should drink moderate amount of red wine, and they thought that was just the thing to do, right? And they had no idea that there's this dark secret in the wine industry that wines are actually filled with a lot of poisons and are too high in alcohol and too high in sugar.
I find all of this,
and nobody's talked to them about that.
I would assume that because these vines, they're older, very old. They're not being irrigated. The root systems must be tremendous, and they must be absorbing far more nutrients from the soil than these grapevines that have been irrigated that are very young. Correct?
Absolutely. So the common sense will answer most all of these questions for you. You don't have to be a farmer or a scientist. But here's how an irrigated grapevine grows. This is real simple. It gets its nutrient and its water from the surface, from a little drip hose that hangs right over its trunk. And that's how it's fed. An irrigated grapevine has a root structure that's about 3 feet, or between 3 and 4 feet in diameter and 3 or 4 feet deep, because it gets all of its nutrient and its water right from this little hose just above its trunk. An unirrigated grapevine will have a root structure that can be 50 to 60 feet deep as it struggles against its neighbors, as it struggles in search for water, just tiny little particles of water in the soil and nutrient. And so even moderately aged vines will have root structures 30, 40 feet deep as they are, constantly struggling and in search. Well, that struggle, my friend, is what creates character in fruit as it struggles against its neighbors. And as we know, and common sense, again, will tell you this, in fitness, in all parts of biology, in all parts of life, resistance builds strength, right? And so as we practice resistance, we gain power. And the same thing happens in the character of the fruit. As the vine struggles, it creates a more complex fruit. This is the reason that Europeans have for 100 years outlawed irrigation in Europe, because they know that irrigation fundamentally changes the character of the fruit, and the character of the fruit is what drives most of the outcome of the winemaking process. I want to touch on one other thing before we move to another question. Is when I talk about sugar levels and then the corresponding alcohol levels and how high alcohol levels have gotten in America, it's also interesting to note and worthwhile for your audience to know that stated alcohol on the bottle. So when you pick up a bottle, and most people don't pay any attention, but if you pick up a bottle and you turn it around, you see it's 15% alcohol. That stated alcohol on the bottle is not required to be accurate under the law. So again, this is where the government and the wine industry are continuing to collaborate in misleading the consumer. Not only have they not put contents labels on wine at the urging of the wine industry. That just doesn't make any sense at all. Why is there not a contents and nutritional label on wine, right? There's one simple reason for it, because they have lobbied to keep it off. But in addition to that, it goes further than that. This corruption between the government and the alcohol industry goes further than that. The alcohol stated on the bottle by law is not required to be accurate. Under the law, which has zero enforcement, even if it were accurate, but under the law, it can be as much as 1.5% over what's stated, right? That's the law. There's a reason for that. Back in how that originally started, back in post-prohibition era, the alcohol testing regimens, the laboratory tests for alcohol, were inconsistent, right? They just weren't that sophisticated. So you could get one result at one lab and another result at another. Well, that's yesterday's news. Today, those systems for testing, the one we use, are very sophisticated and extremely accurate, right? And so there's no reason to continue this fudging factor, except that the wine industry wants to be able to fudge backwards, the domestic industry, because they produce such high alcohol wines. They want to be able to fudge backwards and state a lower alcohol.
I know they do this with all foods, and it's the sad fact that people just don't know. But when you just outlay it like you have, it's pretty astounding. It's really amazing. One other topic that we need to bring up, because I think it's really important. how about molds? I'm assuming that your wines are ochratoxin, mycotoxin free, correct?
They are. So, here's another entry. This is another collaboration between the industry and the government. So in the United States, mycotoxin testing is not required. So we have no idea, when you drink a domestic wine, you have no idea whether it contains mold or not. All wines in the EU, all European wines, are required. Are required to have
Right.
mycotoxin testing. Specifically, they're looking for ochratoxin A. All right. Now, the allowable parts for ochratoxin A in wine are 2 parts per billion in the EU, right? Which is nothing. We never see wines that test positive at all, but I'm telling you that the benchmark, the limit is 2 parts per billion. Now, to give you a reference point, in coffee in the EU, which is also required, no coffee in the United States is required for ochratoxin A testing, but they do require it in Europe. And the limit for coffee it used to be 5 parts per billion. It's now 10 parts per billion. So wine has the most stringent screening for ochratoxin. Now, here's kind of interesting to note. In America, the wine labs, and we work with them, we know enologists well. The wine labs offer ochratoxin A testing, and I'll tell you why. Because it's required when you export a wine. So if I'm an Napa Valley wine producer and I'm going to sell wine in the EU, I have to test the wine for ochratoxin A before it goes out. And I have to include that lab result as a part of my export requirements. However, I don't have to do it to sell it here in America. And no one does. It's an expensive test, and nobody does it. And so you have no idea. Our audience and the people we sell to and the influencers that I work with and the conferences I speak at, mold is a big topic. Right. But for the average American consumer, they're just not aware. But again, this is just another area where the government has collaborated with the industry to keep this kind of information away from the consumer. And we just think that's wrong. I mean, we believe that we should be drinking and eating, when possible, whole, honest, real fruits and vegetables and food types and wine, right? So, and coffee for that matter. You know, I mean, we think we should be drinking a whole, clean product to the best that we can in nature's logic. And that's the reason we say that irrigation is the very first intervention in nature's logic. Right? Nature has this figured out. I mean, we need to put water on it. You know, I mean, nature has it figured out. As I mentioned earlier, the only reason we put water on the grapevine is because it's more profitable.
For United States winemakers?
Well, the only hope potentially, here's the problem. It's a significant challenge. You cannot convert an irrigated grapevine to dry farming, because the root structure is not there. It won't survive. So the only way that you can dry farm a grapevine is you have to start when the grapevine is young, right? So that it trains itself to search for the water. You can't convert it from an irrigated vine. So that's one issue. But I will say this, you know, there's significant concern in California, where the best wines in America are produced. There's significant concerns about drought and water issues. And so there is discussion about dry farming in California, but it's a very, very expensive undertaking to convert these vines to dry farming, because you can't convert them. You have to replant. So when you replant, it takes 3 years to get stable fruit to start making wine again. It's just a very, very capital intensive endeavor. In addition to, dry farming is more difficult and requires more work. It's easier just to turn the spigot on, right? So there are some farming protocols that make it more difficult in order to be successful with it. There are folks in Napa Valley who dry farm, not many, just a handful. I mean, just a microscopic percentage. I mean, it can be done. It is being done. But it is more effort. In terms of additives and winemaking processes, I don't think so, not in the near term. Here's why. The vintner's job and the winemaker's job is to sell wine, right? And so what Americans want and have shown the marketplace for are these higher alcohol, bolder, richer, bigger wines. That's a winemaking style, right? Where we're using additives and adjustments and big oak programs and higher sugar and higher alcohol. That's what the American consumer has responded to. So winemakers and vintners are going to continue to produce wines that people want to buy, or at least that they perceive they want to buy. What we've done is uncover this huge underlying marketplace of people who, A, seek education by listening to shows like yours, who want to learn, who want to live a better, healthier life, to increase their health span, not their lifespan. I mean, lifespan is a luxury, but health span is what we're really looking for, right? Yeah, we want quality. If we get quantity with it, that's a bonus. But it's really important to look at health span, and health span starts really being compromised probably in your 30s. You're on a slippery slope by the time you get your 40s and 50s. I mean, you need to be very diligent, or you're going to start to experience significant health issues. Right, and healthy, young, vibrant, and filled with health and that energy, my friend, that comes from the heart. When you eat clean and live well, you just have a vitality that is just incomparable to your peers around you who are poisoning themselves. And it requires real focus and effort to do that.
Too much effort. I just look at it as just the right thing to do for me, and place high value on it.
Right. I don't. When I say effort, I think I say the effort. I really focus. Just being aware. Just being aware and making some decisions and commitments that there's just some things I don't eat, just some things I don't drink. It's just, and those are replaced with things that bring that spirit of life, right? That underlying energy and passion for living a whole life, and that's what you get and what you feel once you flush your system of all these toxins. Once that we've been eating and drinking for much of our life, just not knowing, not being aware, not being educated. And as you know, I mean, the government, again, has got their hand right up all in the middle of that as well. You might know that myplate.gov, the old food pyramid, is run by the department that runs that is the Department of Agriculture. And their job is to sell grains and corn. Right, and if you go and if you search the director of the Department of Agriculture,
I absolutely,
and you're going to see he does not have the body you want. His name is Tommy Veslek. Anyway, Tommy, Department of Agriculture head. Check him out. He doesn't. All I can tell you is I'm sure he's a nice man, but he doesn't have the body you want.
Get a hold of your wines. How does this whole process with dry farm wines work?
So it's super simple. We're an online wine club. We do not sell to restaurants or to retail. So the only way you can buy our lab quantified healthy wines are directly from us. They're very affordably priced. They average about $22 a bottle, which is very affordable for a fine wine product. Well, for the holidays and for your listeners, we are going to offer them a 1 penny bottle when they make a purchase at our site. And they can find that 1 penny bottle simply by going to the URL dryfarmwines.com/BYWG. And I'll give them that one more time. It's dryfarmwines.com/BYWG. In addition, if anybody wants to reach me or has any questions, feel free to send me an email direct. It's Todd, Todd, at dryfarmwines.com, and we are Dry Farm Wines on all social media.
Any grappa production or In the future, possibility or no?
No, it's too high in alcohol. So, so yeah, it's just, we refer to it as gasoline. I mean, it's kind of like, it's just, I mean, I've drank it a bunch of times, but not in many years. It's just, it's interesting and fun, but it's a high alcohol product. And again, we recommend that people are going to drink, and we drink every day and enjoy it, but it's really important to keep your alcohol dose down. That's the reason we recommend low alcohol wines.
Coming down the pipeline. Any last words, Todd?
Sure. I'd just say, tell your friends you love them, spread more love in the world, and just be more open and have your heart be available and be more vulnerable with your friends and people you know. And thank you for having me today. I love you. I love your audience. I'm really grateful to have been a guest.
My name is Dr. Noah DeCoyer, your co-host, and you are listening to the Beyond Your Wildest Genes podcast. If you like what you've heard today, please share this with your friends and family and encourage them to subscribe on iTunes. You can sign up for our incredible weekly email at www.beyondyourwildestgenes.com. All the appropriate links can be found in the show notes, as well as how to purchase your first dry farm wines for 1 penny. And lastly, help us help you and leave a review on iTunes. A 5-star rating, if we deserve it, really helps and more people hear our message. Thank you, Todd. And as my oldest son Hayden says, be awesome and never unawesome.